My name is Brian Brown. I used to have a phobia of the wind. I don't anymore. And this is the story of how I got one and how I got over it. So my phobia first came on when I was about 4 years old. I was watching cartoons with my older brother, and a severe wind alert came on the TV. Just kind of interrupted the program and said, severe weather alert, high windstorm in your area. And anyway, right about then, my mom asked me if she wanted to go shopping with me, and so I said yes, but I'm kind of worried about this storm. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll be back before it comes." So we go into the store just to do some errands, and then it's a nice, beautiful day when we go in, and we came outside, and it was just like horrifically, in my mind, like really cloudy, really windy day, and my mom kind of had to hold on to me to keep me from blowing in the wind a little bit because there were garbage cans flying. And anyway, little 4-year-old me was traumatized by the experience, and for whatever reason, my natural tendency to be anxious about the world kind of fixated itself on the wind. And so it turned into this, like I said, a phobia that was just like this trigger to panic every time it was cloudy and windy outside. And so that progressed from just like a one-time scary experience to being this defining feature of my childhood. And it made going to school kind of hard sometimes because it would be really windy and cloudy outside, and I would be seized with this feeling of panic and terror, and those around me didn't really understand what was going on. And I remember one experience that was pretty bad. I was in 2nd grade, and I can't remember if it was during class or during recess, but it was a really dark, kind of rainy, super windy day, and I was just like, my capacity to focus was just totally gone because I was just so filled with panic. And the teacher had a filing cabinet in the corner of the room, and in between the filing cabinet and the wall there was a little Rubbermaid plastic box. And I remember just wanting so badly to get away from the wind and from my fear that I just kind of curled up back in that little corner on that box and just tried to stay calm and not think about the wind, because it was whistling. It was making the school kind of whistle. And so that I really just couldn't get away from it. I couldn't distract myself from it. And so sometimes it even kept me from going to school. It was a really, really windy day, and the house would be blowing in the wind. The house would kind of whistle in the wind. I would go down to our basement. We had a cement cellar, and that just seemed like the most secure place in the house for me. And so I grabbed this red blanket that my grandma had given me and wrap it around my ears. And I would just scream because I didn't want to hear the house whistle in the wind. So, needless to say, this was a really traumatic part of my childhood. And it brought a lot of stress, and I felt different a lot of the time. And people would ask me, like, what are you afraid of? Like, is there something like you're afraid happening? And they would try and talk me through it, thinking like, oh, if we'll just help Brian notice that nothing bad is going to happen to him, he'll be okay. And it took me a while to get words for it, but I wasn't afraid of anything. It was an irrational fear. And if you haven't experienced this, I don't know that you can really know what it's like, but I think there was a little bit of like, oh no, like what if something fell on me? But that's really not what was going on in my brain. That's not why this was a multiple year, really traumatic experience. It was just because I was afraid of fear, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it was just this trigger response to panic. And it had fixated itself on this trigger of the wind. And so it just continued through my childhood, and I think it kind of all came to a head one day when I was in 4th grade. I was at home again, and we had this nice big window that opened up into our backyard, and I saw through the window a tree kind of like moving in the wind, and some clouds were coming in, and that feeling of panic kind of started to set in. And I went and kind of hid behind this chair that we had always had that was in the corner, just to kind of get away from it. Didn't want to see it or think about it. And my dad, what I assume must have been going through my dad's mind was, okay, Brian is in 4th grade now. If we don't solve this, like, he's not going to turn out normally. And so he grabbed me and kind of said, no you don't. And brought me onto our backyard, onto this swing that we had. Like one of those couch swings, not a couch swing, but porch swing. So he brought me back into this porch swing, and we sat down on it, and he just held me there against my will, and I screamed and screamed and screamed, and I think I remember seeing the neighbor look over at us with some kind of funny looks, and I was not happy, and I'm sure he was thinking like, okay, if we could just get him to the point where he'll relax out here, things will be okay. And he'll finally realize that it's okay and get beyond this, because it's just been such a big struggle in his life. And so I screamed, and I don't know if it was 10 minutes or a half hour or how long it took for him to give up. But I was grasping for anything I could to make him stop. And so finally I said, "Dad, you're taking away my agency." And for whatever reason, that's what got to his heart. And he said, "Okay, I can't do this anymore." So he brought me in. And that was the moment that my parents realized that they didn't have the expertise to help me. And that forcing me through it wasn't going to help me. And that if I was going to get over this, I needed some extra help. Which is an interesting thing, because my mom had years of experience teaching elementary school. And my dad is a medical doctor. So you couldn't ask for more qualified parents than I had. But we hit a point in my development where we realized that their skills were not enough for what I needed. So we set up an appointment with Dr. Morris, a psychologist in the local area, and met with him. And I learned a bunch from that first meeting, but the moment that I remember most is coming home and having this conversation at our dinner table with my mom. So it was just me and her, and we were sitting there, and she said, "Brian, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You don't have to get over this. But if you're done with having this rule your life, you can be." And that was a really powerful moment. I was so liberated by that thought that I actually laughed. And I've only had this experience, that kind of laughter, once or twice in my life, where it was just, there was no other way to express the delight that I was feeling there, or the hope that brought. And she said, "This is going to be hard, but if you want to do it, you can." And I said, "Yeah, I want to do it." And so we did. We started working with Dr. Morris regularly. So I'd go, I don't remember, once a week or how often we went. And he taught me a whole bunch of tools to learn to deal with it. And one important thing that he taught me was that this tendency to be anxious and the tendency to have it fixate on one thing will probably be my companion the rest of my life. And so I needed to learn to live with it. And I probably would never be cured per se from it, but eventually I would get to the point where I would have mastery over it rather than it having mastery over me. And so he taught me tools to do that. And everything from learning to distract myself to just getting caught in the moment, having fun, or one important skill was to imagine my brain like a train station, and to have thoughts come in like a train, and it stops, and then people get out, and some of them might be like fear, and they can hang around for a while, and then you can just be totally confident that if you wait around long enough, they'll get back in the train and they'll go. And in the same way, I would have fear come, and I would let it come and know that that's okay, and just ride through it until it decided to leave. And so we worked gradually to build up my capacity to stay outside, and to have that happen, and to feel the fear come and the panic build up, and then to ride it and stay long enough for it to go back down. And so we had time goals. When it was a windy day, I'd go outside, and at first it was, can you spend 10 seconds outside? And I would. and then I'd go and stay as long as I could, and then I'd go back inside. And then I got to 30 seconds, and then I remember one time my older sister was baiting me on with candy, like if I stayed outside for a minute on a really windy day. And so that was a fun growing experience, and gradually the goal was to stay outside at every single recess, and got to that point. And then I was finally to the point where I was good, and it didn't really scare me anymore. And so we stopped visiting Dr. Morris, and life continued as normal. And then I think a few months later, I remember having this experience of, like, it was a really dark, stormy, windy day, and feeling the panic come again and thinking, oh my gosh, can I really deal with this? And then staying there and riding it through and thinking, wow, that is not where I was before. Like, I've really come a long way. And then years passed, and I forgot that I even had this problem. And I look back on it now, and I think, like, wow, that is a totally different person. You know, and I sometimes I go back to the spots where all this happened, and I feel like I'm looking back on the old me. And I can look back on that old me lovingly and know that that it all turned out okay. And I totally didn't think in the moment that it would. You know, when I was in the thick of it, I just remember thinking that, how could I ever be normal? How can I ever get over this? And truly, overcoming it was the hardest thing I had done up to that point. But again, I just would repeat that that's a totally foreign concept to me of being afraid of the wind. So that's not to say that my anxiety went away. It certainly popped back up in different manifestations throughout my life, but having gone through that when I was a fourth grader and being able to recognize that this is not, you know, I'm not really afraid of the wind, I'm just feeling anxious and it's fixating on this thing. And then I can take a step back and go, okay, well, then, you know, and start to deal with it and try to not let it fixate and turn into this, you know, this big life-changing thing, but rather just kind of ride the wave, let it come, and then let it go, without succumbing to panic. And the longer I go, the better I get at dealing with it, the better I get at recognizing it. Certainly at more stressed times of my life, it comes back more. And, you know, I'll be going along, and then I'll start to recognize some symptoms, and I'll go, oh wait, I must be stressed out about something, like what's going on, what do I need to rebalance in my life? But it's totally manageable at this point. So one thing I learned from the experience was that I couldn't, like when somebody tried to force me to change, that never worked. Especially when, and I think people want to do that with people who have phobias because they don't understand that it's totally irrational, and that it's not really about the thing that they're fixated on. It's more a symptom of an approach to life, or just, you know, your personality. Something that Dr. Morris told me was that he asked me a bunch of questions, and I didn't realize he was psychoanalyzing me because I was in fourth grade. But he told my mother afterwards, Brian is the type to be feeling responsible for everybody around him. You know, he'll see something on the news and feel responsible for whatever, and that's true. I mean, I do. I feel immensely responsible for the happiness of those around me, and I think it's important for anybody who struggles with anxiety to recognize that they're probably not really nervous about what they think they're nervous about. I mean, that was certainly my case, and I had to learn that was, so those feelings, as much as they felt really real to me, like that panic at seeing a tree start to move in the wind, I mean, I was sure at the time that it was about the wind, but gradually I started to disbelieve it, and to say, like, yeah, I have that feeling, and it's very real and very deep and very horrible, but it has nothing to do with reality. And that was kind of ennobling, because as a fourth grader, you really don't want to be thinking like a 2-year-old of having this totally irrational fear of the wind, you know? And so to be able to recognize and say these 2-year-old approaches to life, they're not me. it's just this response that I've developed, this kind of, I guess, bad habit that I developed. That was so liberating to say that that's not me. And even still, when I'm starting to have anxiety and starting to think irrationally, like, it's helpful for me to say this is not really what I'm experiencing. Like, the real me is not worried about that. This is an emotional way of dealing with being stressed out about life. And I just mentioned that it was a habit. It's dawned on me recently that when I gave in to panic, there was some sort of relief there. It was awful to just kind of let my emotions go and throw them to the wind, as it were. But I did it because there was a reward. There's some sort of mental reward to giving in to your panic. And perhaps there was some attention reward that I got too. I think that certainly can play into these kinds of situations. And learning to recognize that I'm doing this because there's some sort of reward, and therefore I need to separate myself from that because it's creating these really unhealthy habits, has also been really helpful for me now to avoid those habits, to avoid having my anxiety fixate on something now. So my point in saying all this is not to draw attention to myself or whatnot, but I really just wanted to say that if you or somebody you know struggles with anxiety, you don't have to change anytime. You can stay right where you are as long as you want, but when you are ready to change and when you're ready to be done with having this rule your life, you can, and it's much better on the other side. And so I know that for a fact. And I also do want to mention that when I was really in the thick of being afraid of the wind, I used to pray all the time, Heavenly Father, please stop the wind. Heavenly Father, please stop the wind. And I would just really repetitively say that because I just wanted so badly for the wind to stop. And he never made the wind magically stop. I can't recall one experience where I prayed for the wind to stop and it stopped. But instead, he helped me get over it. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm also really grateful that it happened to me as a kid. I know a lot of people who have had anxiety come on later on in their lives, especially in the young adult stage of life. And it's a new thing to them. It's a new experience to all of a sudden be out of control of your emotions. And I totally understand that. One of the things that Dr. Morris told me and that my mom told me was that you're not the only person who's had this experience, and you're not alone. And I kind of said, really? I feel kind of alone. Like I just couldn't imagine that somebody else had this experience. But it was comforting to know that no, like, I'm not alone in going through this kind of experience, and people survive it all the time, and they live happy, normal, healthy lives with it. That's important to recognize, and it's important to recognize that just because you've had a few experiences with anxiety and have felt out of control of your emotions doesn't mean that the rest of your life is going to be dominated by it. It's recuperable, and especially working with trained professionals, when you recognize that you're at that point, that can help immensely. Sometimes the people around you who may love you so much don't have what you need. And I do kind of want to discount everything I've said as a personal experience. By no means am I a trained professional. And my words shouldn't be taken as anything more than my personal experience. But if you are experiencing anxiety, or know somebody who's experiencing anxiety, and it's gone on long enough, and nothing really seems to be working, I highly recommend turning to somebody who is trained in helping people deal with that. Sometimes there's just no better way of overcoming something that otherwise could last for years, as it did with me, and cause stress that doesn't need to be there. So that's my story. I used to have a phobia. I don't now. That's me.